Why are millions of people buying Bitcoin without even understanding what they've gotten themselves into? Very few people have actually read Bitcoin's white paper, and even fewer truly understood it. And honestly, that's scary. In just 9 pages, Satoshi Nakamoto laid out how to create digital money without banks, without permission, and without middlemen. And the strangest part? Today, massive numbers of people are investing in Bitcoin without having the slightest idea why it even works. In this video, I break down the white paper in plain English, not as a dry technical document, but as a real blueprint for building an entirely new financial system. If you understand this, your entire view of Bitcoin will change. And if you don't, then you're playing a game whose rules you never bothered to read. Satoshi starts with the basics. A Bitcoin transaction isn't a bank entry or a row in some database. It's a chain of digital signatures. Every time a coin moves to a new owner, the current holder cryptographically signs the previous transaction and links it to the public key of the next person. The result is a public history of ownership that anyone can verify mathematically. There are no opinions here, only calculations. But that immediately raises the core problem that plagued digital money for decades. How do you make sure the same Bitcoin wasn't sent to 2 people at nearly the same time? In traditional systems, the answer was always the same. A central authority, a bank, a middleman, a controller, which means no real financial independence. And that's exactly where Satoshi chose to take a radical path. Who gave some network the right to decide the fate of your money? And why does that sound terrifying? Satoshi understood this perfectly. The moment a system has a central controller, it's no longer independent money. It's just another bank in digital form. Every transaction needs approval. Any account can be frozen. Any transfer can be reversed. So in the white paper, he didn't propose a cosmetic upgrade to old models. He introduced an entirely different principle. All transactions would be public, and their order wouldn't be decided by a company or a government, but by the network as a whole. The majority of nodes makes the call. That's exactly how Bitcoin still works today. The foundation hasn't changed. There are more participants, higher security, a more valuable network. But the core logic is the same. In Bitcoin, you don't take anyone's word for it. You verify everything yourself. And once that clicks, you start to see why this system doesn't resemble any form of money humanity has ever used before. To agree on transaction order without a boss at the top, Satoshi introduced a crucial mechanism, the timestamp server. This is where the foundation of the entire blockchain architecture is born. A timestamp is cryptographic proof that certain data existed at a specific moment in time. A bundle of information is taken, its hash is calculated, and the result is published publicly. From that point on, changing the data without detection becomes impossible. But then comes the most important part. Each new stamp contains the hash of the previous one. That's how a chain of blocks is formed. If someone tries to tamper with old data, they wouldn't just have to break a single piece. They'd have to redo the entire sequence that follows, which means recalculating a massive amount of work. Instead of trusting words, you get mathematical proof. No judge, no arbiter, only public facts. And that logic is what every modern blockchain system is built on. Why is rewriting Bitcoin's past almost impossible? And who actually decides which version of history is correct? The timestamp chain by itself looks elegant, but Satoshi knew elegance wasn't enough. The system needed a real defense against fraud. That's where the idea that turned Bitcoin from theory into a working machine comes in. Proof of work. The concept is simple, but brutal. To add a new block to the chain, a node has to solve a computationally expensive puzzle. It has to find a special number, so that the block's hash meets strict conditions, like starting with a certain number of zeros. That takes time, electricity, powerful hardware. There are no shortcuts, but verifying that the puzzle was solved correctly takes only a fraction of a second. That creates a crucial asymmetry. Creating a block is expensive, but checking it is almost free, which means once a block is added, changing it retroactively becomes extremely difficult. Any alteration would require recomputing not just that block, but every block that comes after it. That's how Bitcoin protects its past. But then another question appears. What if different participants propose different versions of the chain? Who decides which one is real? Satoshi's answer is ruthless. It's not human voting. And it's not the number of computers. It's the amount of real-world work behind it. The chain backed by the most computational effort and energy wins. That rule hasn't changed since 2008. The difficulty automatically adjusts, so blocks keep arriving at roughly the same pace, no matter how many miners are in the network. The hardware got faster. The rules stayed the same. And now the picture becomes clear. Bitcoin isn't a server. It isn't a company. It's a massive machine where thousands of independent nodes follow simple but mercilessly strict rules. And next, we'll see how that machine operates in real time. What happens when thousands of computers are competing at the same time for control over your money? The Bitcoin network springs into action the moment someone sends a transaction. It doesn't go to a boss or a central office. It instantly propagates across the entire network. Every node receives it, checks the basic rules, and bundles it together with other transactions into what's called a candidate block. Then, the race begins. Every miner is trying to be the first to solve the proof-of-work puzzle for their own block. There's no queue, no licenses, no permissions, just open competition. When one node finally finds a valid solution, it broadcasts it to the rest of the network. But here's the critical part. Nobody just takes its word for it. Other nodes independently recheck every transaction, making sure the coins weren't already spent. The signatures are valid, and the protocol rules were followed. Only if everything checks out does the block get accepted and become the new foundation of the chain. Sometimes temporary splits happen. Two blocks can appear almost at the same time. The system doesn't break, it doesn't panic. Each node simply keeps building on the block it saw first. Then the hard rule kicks in. The chain with the greatest accumulated amount of work wins. That's how the network converges back to a single shared history. The same logic still runs today. And once you understand it, it becomes clear why Bitcoin is so difficult to shut down or rewrite. But there's one more critical piece. None of this would function if people weren't economically motivated to play by the rules. Why would anyone spend real electricity and money to secure the network? Satoshi's answer is both simple and brilliant. Why is it more profitable for miners to play fair? And what happens if someone tries to break the system? Satoshi understood something fundamental. No decentralized network survives unless its participants are paid to behave honestly. That's why every new block contains a special transaction, a reward for the miner who first finds a valid proof-of-work solution. That's how new Bitcoins enter circulation. It's very similar to gold mining. To extract a scarce resource, you have to spend real effort. In Bitcoin's case, that means computing power and electricity. On top of that comes a second revenue stream, transaction fees. If the total value of the inputs in a transaction is larger than the outputs, the difference goes to the miner who included that transaction in their block. Over time, as the issuance of new coins slows down and eventually stops, those fees will become the primary incentive for securing the network. And this is where the system reveals its real trick. The mechanism doesn't just reward honest behavior. It makes attacks economically irrational. If someone amasses enormous computational power, they face two choices: try to undermine confidence in the network and devalue their own holdings, or follow the rules and earn more than everyone else. Bitcoin literally turns honesty into the most profitable strategy. That's why the system has survived for so long and continues to function without a central boss. This isn't freedom romance, it's cold, hard incentives. But Satoshi wasn't thinking only about security. He was looking decades ahead. If the network goes global, how does it scale? The answer to that question is hidden in the next part. Why could Bitcoin have choked under its own weight? And how did Satoshi plan for that from the very beginning? In 2008, almost nobody was thinking about what would happen if the network grew to millions of users. Satoshi was. Bitcoin had to be not just secure, but viable over the long run. If every node were forced to store every transaction forever, the system would eventually become bloated and accessible only to large corporations. To prevent that, the white paper introduces an elegant solution: the Merkle tree. Instead of keeping transactions in a simple list, they're arranged into a hash-based structure. Each transaction becomes a cryptographic fingerprint. Those fingerprints are paired up, hashed again, and repeated, over and over, until a single root remains. That root is placed into the block header. Why does that matter? Because old transaction data can be pruned without destroying the block's proof of integrity. As long as the Merkle root stays the same, the block is still verifiable. That dramatically reduces the storage requirements for nodes. And here's the impressive part. Satoshi calculated that block headers would take about 80 bytes. At one block every 10 minutes, that's only a few megabytes per year. In 2008, that sounded perfectly reasonable. Today, the full blockchain weighs hundreds of gigabytes. And yet, an ordinary person can still run a full node at home. That isn't an accident. That's architecture. But there's an even more subtle trick that lets the network serve millions of users. Why are you even allowed to use Bitcoin without verifying everything yourself? And why could that be dangerous? Satoshi understood something crucial. If every user were forced to run a full node, the system would never reach mass adoption. So in the white paper, he describes a simplified way to verify payments. It preserves core security, while dramatically lowering the technical burden. In this model, a user stores only the block headers from the chain with the most accumulated proof of work. That's a tiny fraction of all the data. When they receive a payment, they ask the network for a specific proof, a Merkle branch, that shows the transaction really is included in a particular block. If that block sits on the main chain and new blocks are built on top of it, confidence grows with every additional layer. The deeper a transaction is buried in history, the harder it becomes to reverse. But there's an important nuance here. This kind of user isn't independently verifying every transaction on the network. They're operating under the assumption that the majority of computational power is behaving honestly. Satoshi explicitly warns about this. If an attacker were ever to gain control over the network, simplified verification would become more vulnerable than running a full node. That's exactly why Bitcoin doesn't force everyone into the same role. It gives people a choice. That flexibility is one of the reasons the system has survived for more than a decade. But the white paper doesn't stop at scaling. It also explains how the Bitcoins themselves actually exist inside the system.